Under the glowing lights of Hollywood, an event unlike any other was about to take place. The evening had been planned as a celebration of cinema, a place where the past, present, and future of film would be honored. The organizers had managed to do something extraordinary. They had brought Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro together on the same stage. For the audience, this was not just another night. It was a once-in-a-lifetime chance to see two living legends side by side. People whispered in excitement, cameras flashed, and the energy in the room felt electric. Clint Eastwood walked in first, tall, calm, and carrying himself with the kind of confidence that only decades in the spotlight could give. He had the air of a man who had seen it all, someone who no longer needed to prove anything. His career stretched back to the westerns that had shaped his name, to the gritty dramas he had later directed. He was both actor and filmmaker, both star and storyteller. His fans respected him not just for his talent, but for his no-nonsense personality. When Clint Eastwood entered a room, people paid attention. Robert De Niro followed, and the applause was just as loud. He carried a different kind of energy, quieter at first glance, but sharp and intense beneath the surface. De Niro was known for disappearing into his roles, becoming unrecognizable from one film to the next. People admired his method, his dedication, his willingness to break himself down to build a character. While Clint embodied control and raw toughness, Robert represented transformation and depth. Seeing them together was like watching two worlds of acting collide. The hall was packed with actors, directors, producers, and fans who had grown up with their movies. Every face in the room glowed with anticipation. Whispers ran across the rows. Some people wondered what stories Clint would tell. Others were eager to hear Robert talk about his famous method acting. There was no doubt that both men commanded respect. Yet there was also a sense of curiosity. What would happen when such strong personalities shared the same stage? Would it be harmony or sparks? The host introduced them with long praises, speaking about Clint's endless list of iconic films and Robert's unforgettable performances. The crowd roared in approval. The applause went on, and for a moment it felt like pure magic. Here were two men who had shaped generations of film lovers, two men who had carried Hollywood on their shoulders in different ways. Their names alone could fill theaters. Their presence together seemed almost unreal. Clint took his seat, leaning back with a slight smile. He looked comfortable, as though nothing could rattle him. Robert sat beside him, adjusting his jacket and giving a small nod to the crowd. While Clint's smile gave the impression of quiet control, Robert's nod suggested patience, as though he was ready but waiting to see how things would unfold. The audience watched their every movement, as if even the way they shifted in their chairs could reveal something about who they were. For many in the room, this moment carried more than entertainment value. It was history. People had grown up watching Clint ride across dusty plains, firing guns with that steely glare. They had grown up watching Robert vanish into characters so deeply that you forgot you were watching Robert De Niro at all. And now these two men, symbols of different eras and different styles, were sitting together just a few feet apart. It felt like a dream turned into reality. The atmosphere was not just excitement, it was reverence. Fans leaned forward in their seats. Journalists prepared their pens and recorders, hoping to capture quotes that would make headlines. Actors in the audience whispered about how much they had learned from these two men, and young filmmakers watched with wide eyes, realizing they were witnessing something that would be remembered for decades. There was also an unspoken tension, though, the kind of tension that comes when two giants stand side by side. It was not anger, not yet, but a quiet awareness that they were very different. Their lives had run on parallel tracks, both successful, both admired, but rarely intersecting. Tonight would be one of the rare times when those tracks crossed, and no one could predict what would happen. As the lights dimmed slightly and the microphones were adjusted, the crowd held its breath. Clint leaned forward, ready to speak. His presence was steady, like a mountain. Robert sat with his head tilted slightly, ready to listen, but also ready to challenge if he felt the need. The entire room waited for that first word, for the first spark of conversation. What no one knew was that this night would not end the way they had imagined. They had come expecting harmony, expecting gentle stories and laughter. Instead, the evening would take a turn that no one could have predicted before long. The celebration of cinema would transform into something raw and unforgettable. But in that opening moment, none of that had happened yet. All that existed was the promise of two legends sharing the same stage, the excitement of fans seeing their heroes in person, and the fragile balance between admiration and rivalry. The stage had been set, the lights were bright, and history was about to be made. Clint Eastwood sat back in his chair, the microphone close to his mouth, his voice calm and steady as he began to speak about his career. He talked about the long days on set, about the way discipline mattered more than anything else. He explained how he liked to get things done quickly, with focus, no wasted time, no wasted energy. For Clint, filmmaking was about being sharp, about trusting instinct, and about letting the work speak for itself. He did not believe in overthinking. He believed in doing. Robert De Niro listened carefully, his head tilted slightly, his expression serious when it was his turn. His tone was different, softer but also more intense. He spoke about preparation, about studying every detail of a character. He explained how he would spend months getting into the mind of the person he was playing. He told stories of gaining weight, losing weight, changing his voice. His walk, his habits. For Robert, acting was about becoming someone else completely, about giving every piece of himself to the role. The audience could feel the difference in their words. Clint spoke like a man who believed in control. Robert spoke like a man who believed in surrender. Clint trusted the power of simplicity. Robert trusted the power of transformation. Both had built their careers on these ideas, and both were respected for them. But hearing them side by side made the contrast sharper than ever. Clint leaned forward slightly, his eyes narrowing as he talked about how too much preparation could get in the way of honesty. He said the camera could see through tricks, that the audience wanted truth, not rehearsed gestures. Some people in the crowd nodded in agreement, but Robert shifted in his seat, his lips tightening as if he had heard this kind of remark before. When he replied, he spoke with firmness, saying that without preparation there could be no truth, that only through total immersion could an actor reach the heart of a character. The hall grew quieter as the two men began to sound less like storytellers and more like rivals. Clint's words carried the weight of his old Western heroes. Direct and cutting, Robert's words carried the fire of his method training, layered and passionate. They were not just discussing acting. They were defending their life's work, their beliefs, their very identities as artists. For the audience, it was fascinating. It felt as if they were not only listening to two actors, but also watching two worlds collide. Clint's world was shaped by the toughness of the frontier, by men of few words who let their actions speak. Robert's world was shaped by the raw streets of New York, by characters full of pain, anger, and hidden layers. When Clint spoke, it was like hearing a cowboy telling you to keep it simple. When Robert spoke, it was like hearing a philosopher insisting that truth demanded sacrifice. The host tried to smooth things over, asking light questions, but the mood had already shifted. People in the crowd leaned forward, whispering to each other, sensing that something bigger was brewing. The clash of styles was no longer just a difference of opinion. It was becoming personal. Clint raised an eyebrow at one point, smirking as if to say Robert was making things too complicated. Robert noticed it and his eyes flashed with irritation. Robert told a story about preparing for a famous role, how he lived in a small apartment, studied people on the streets, ate the same food every day, just to feel the characters struggle. He explained that without that sacrifice, the performance would have been hollow. The crowd listened in awe, but Clint shook his head slowly, replying that no matter how much an actor prepared, if he didn't trust his natural instincts when the camera rolled, it would all fall apart. The room was divided. Some clapped for Clint's sharp wisdom. Others clapped for Robert's deep dedication. It felt like a debate, rather than a celebration, and both men seemed unwilling to give ground. Robert's voice grew more heated, Clint's voice grew firmer, and the energy in the hall shifted from admiration to tension. What had started as a discussion of art now felt like a test of pride. Clint was defending a lifetime of films built on instinct. Robert was defending a lifetime of films built on transformation. Neither wanted to look weak. Neither wanted to give the impression that the other's way was better. The clash of styles had become a clash of egos, and yet for the audience this was unforgettable. They had come to see two legends tell stories, but now they were seeing something much more dramatic. They were seeing the raw truth of who Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro really were, not just as actors but as men. The stage was no longer just a stage. It had become a battlefield of ideas, and everyone in the room could feel that something explosive was just around the corner. The air inside the hall was already thick with tension. The audience had noticed the sharp differences between Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro. Some people smiled nervously. Others whispered to the person sitting next to them. Everyone could feel that the conversation was moving away from friendly storytelling and slipping into something heavier. Clint had spoken about discipline and simplicity. Robert had defended his method acting. But now the stage was starting to feel like a ring. Two champions circling each other. Clint leaned closer to the microphone, his voice calm but cutting. He said something that at first sounded like a casual remark. But the weight of the words was heavy, he said. Some actors hide behind all those method games. They forget that the job is to tell the truth, not to play tricks. The audience chuckled nervously. Some laughed out loud, thinking Clint meant it as humor. But Robert's face changed, his jaw tightened, his eyes narrowed. It was clear he had taken the words as a direct jab. Robert sat forward, his voice sharper now. He said that acting was not about games, it was about living the role. He explained that every character he played demanded a full transformation. He told Clint that without this dedication, performances would be flat and lifeless. The audience clapped for his passion. But they also noticed the edge in his tone. This was no longer a polite exchange. This was personal. Clint gave a half smile, the kind of smile that carried more challenge than warmth. He said he respected actors who worked hard, but he had no patience for those who turned acting into a circus. His words echoed in the room. The laughter this time was uneasy. People glanced at each other, wondering if they were really witnessing a fight between two of the greatest names in Hollywood. Robert leaned in even closer, almost cutting Clint off. His voice rising just slightly, he said that Clint's style was outdated, that times had changed, that audiences wanted depth, not just cool looks and simple gestures. Some gasps were heard in the crowd because Robert's words cut deep. They touched the heart of Clint's career, the very thing he was known for. The host tried to calm things down with a new question. But Clint ignored it. He locked eyes with Robert. His voice steady, he said, "Maybe you should stop pretending to be other people and start being yourself." The room went silent. No laughter this time, no clapping, just silence. People felt the sting of the remark, and they knew Robert felt it too. Robert's hands tightened on the microphone. He gave a sharp laugh, not a laugh of joy, but of disbelief. He asked Clint if he thought great performances just happened by magic. He mentioned his roles where he gained or lost weight, where he changed his entire life to bring truth to the screen. He said, "That's not pretending, that's sacrifice." The audience clapped again, louder this time as if to support him. Clint didn't clap, Clint didn't even move. He just stared at Robert with that same cool, unshaken look. The same look that had frozen villains in his movies. And for a moment Robert looked back, eyes flashing with anger. The tension between them was so strong that the entire hall seemed to hold its breath. In the front rows, actors and directors exchanged nervous glances. They had come expecting to be inspired. Instead, they were watching two giants trying to cut each other down. The energy had changed completely. What was once admiration had become discomfort, yet no one could look away. It was too fascinating, too raw. The clash of styles had turned into a spark of real hostility. Clint represented the old guard, the tough man who believed less was more. Robert represented the new wave, the actor who believed in breaking himself down for the role. Both had built legacies on their methods, and both were too proud to step back. The audience felt like they were watching history. Not the kind of history where legends sit side by side and share laughs, but the kind of history where something breaks, something unforgettable. The nervous laughter had faded. The applause had become divided. The room was split between Clint's fans and Robert's supporters. In that moment, it was no longer about acting, no longer about cinema, it was about pride. Clint and Robert were not just defending their styles, they were defending who they were. Each word became sharper, each look became colder, and the air felt like it could ignite at any second. The spark had been lit, and everyone in the hall knew it. The evening that was supposed to honor cinema had now become a battleground. The calm beginning was gone. What stood in its place was the fire of two legends unwilling to bow to one another, and deep down, the audience sensed that this was only the beginning. The real explosion was still to come. The hall grew colder as the voices of Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro clashed louder. What had started as a simple conversation about acting styles was no longer just a discussion. It had become an open battle. Clint's voice carried the sharpness of a man who had nothing to prove, but everything to defend. Robert's words carried the fire of someone who could not allow his craft to be disrespected. The polite masks were gone now, and both men spoke with raw honesty. Clint leaned forward, his elbow on the armrest, his tone low but heavy. He told the crowd that acting was not about hiding behind long hours of preparation. It was about being real in the moment. He said that audiences could smell when an actor was forcing it, When a performance was more about tricks than truth, his words cut through the silence like a knife, and the audience reacted with nervous murmurs, some nodding, some shifting in their seats. Robert's head snapped up, his voice rising with emotion. He said that Clint's idea of truth was shallow, that without digging deep, without living inside the skin of a character, there was no way to capture real human pain. He pointed to his own career, mentioning how he had transformed himself in film after film, sacrificing comfort, health, even his personal life, all for the sake of honesty on screen. His passion shook the room, and this time the applause was louder. Clint did not clap, Clint did not smile. Instead, he raised his hand and interrupted. His voice sharp, he said, "You call that honesty? I call it a costume show." The crowd gasped. The host tried to step in, but Clint kept talking. His words flowing like bullets. He said audiences didn't need actors to starve themselves or change their lives. They needed actors to stand on screen and deliver truth without the extra noise. Robert's face flushed red. He turned his body toward Clint. Ignoring the host completely now, he shot back that Clint's roles had always been the same, that he had built a career on playing the same tough guy with a squint and a gun. He said the industry had moved forward, that people wanted more than just one face repeated over and over. The crowd froze at the harshness of the words. They had never heard De Niro speak with such open fire. Clint's smile disappeared. His voice dropped even lower, almost a growl. He said, "At least I never had to beg the audience to believe me." His words hit Robert like a punch, and for the first time Robert's composure cracked. He raised his hand in frustration, his voice shaking not with fear but with anger. He asked Clint if he thought decades of hard work and iconic performances meant nothing. He asked Clint if he truly believed that his way was the only way. The tension spread through the audience like a wave. The laughter from earlier was gone. No one dared to clap now. They were watching two lions fight, and they were afraid to make a sound. Some leaned back in their seats, their eyes wide. Others leaned forward, as if unable to look away. Every word felt dangerous. Every pause felt like the moment before a storm. The host, sweating now, tried again to lighten the mood, but neither man was willing to stop. Clint jabbed at Robert's style, calling it a performance for himself rather than the audience. Robert fired back that Clint's style was lazy, that he had hidden behind his cool image for years instead of challenging himself. Their words collided like thunder, filling the hall with electricity. People in the crowd began to whisper, some saying Clint had gone too far, others saying Robert was being too sensitive. But no matter which side they chose, they all agreed on one thing. This was no longer just a disagreement. It was an explosion of egos, the kind of moment that would be remembered for years. Robert leaned so close to his microphone that his voice echoed harshly. He said, "You may have played the cowboy, Clint, but I became every man I ever played." The audience gasped. The insult was clear. Clint did not flinch. He leaned back in his chair, his eyes narrowing, his silence louder than words. And then in a slow, deliberate tone, he replied, "And maybe that's your problem. Maybe you don't know who you are anymore." The words landed like a heavy blow. The silence that followed was absolute. No one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the whole hall had frozen. Robert's hands gripped the microphone so tightly that his knuckles turned white. His breathing quickened. He tried to laugh it off, but the laugh sounded hollow, forced. The clash was no longer just about acting. It was about identity, about respect, about pride. Clint and Robert had crossed the line from debate to insult. The stage that was supposed to celebrate their greatness had become a battlefield where neither man wanted to back down. The tension was unbearable, and everyone in the audience knew that this was only the beginning. The real breaking point was yet to come. Robert De Niro's laugh had faded, but the anger in his eyes was still there. The audience sat in silence, caught between admiration and shock. Clint Eastwood had pushed him with sharp words, and Robert was not the type of man to walk away quietly. He leaned forward in his chair, his hands gripping the microphone, and interrupted Clint mid-sentence. The sound of his voice cut across the hall. Sharp and forceful, Clint stopped speaking, his eyes turning slowly toward Robert. The crowd held its breath. Robert raised his hand as if to take control of the stage, his voice louder now. He began to explain that acting was not a simple trick, that it was about transformation. He said every role he had ever played came from pain, sacrifice, and total commitment. He spoke quickly, his words filled with passion. But the way he spoke over Clint felt less like a discussion and more like a challenge. The audience could feel the heat in his tone. Clint's jaw tightened. He was not a man who liked being interrupted. His patience, already thin, was breaking. He leaned forward. His voice low and hard, he told Robert to step back, to let him finish his thought. But Robert did not stop. His voice only grew stronger. He said the world did not need the same old cowboy speech, that audiences deserved more. Clint's eyes darkened and the room grew colder. The audience shifted uncomfortably. Some covered their mouths in shock. Others glanced around, wondering if security would step in. The host nervously tried to ease the situation, but his words were drowned out by the clash of voices on stage. Robert kept pushing, saying that Clint's way was outdated, that his films survived only because of his image. Clint's fingers tapped against the armrest, a sign of the storm building inside him. Then Clint leaned into his microphone. His voice firm and sharp, he said, "This is my last warning, Robert. Step back." The crowd gasped at the seriousness of his tone. Clint Eastwood was known for his calmness, for his quiet control, but now his words carried the weight of real anger. Robert, however, did not step back. He smiled. But it was not a warm smile. It was the smile of a man ready to fight. Robert stood slightly, leaning forward, his hand pressing against the table, his body language showing defiance. He insisted on finishing his point. His words came faster, stronger. His eyes locked on Clint's. The tension between them had become physical, not in punches or shoves, but in the way their bodies leaned, in the sharpness of their voices. The air felt thick, charged, ready to explode. Clint slowly pushed himself up from his chair, his tall frame towering over the table. The audience gasped again. The cameras zoomed in, every second feeling like history in the making. Clint's movements were slow, deliberate, full of authority. His eyes never leaving Robert. Robert did not move back. His chin lifted, his stance firm. Both men now locked in a silent duel as dangerous as their words. The host tried once more to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the silence of the audience. No one was talking anymore. No one dared to cough or whisper. Everyone's attention was on Clint and Robert, waiting for the next move. The tension was so heavy it felt like the whole hall was trembling. Clint finally spoke, his voice cutting through the silence like a blade. He told Robert that respect was earned by listening, not by shouting over someone else. He said Robert's refusal to step back showed more about his pride than his talent. Robert's lips curled into a half smile. He shook his head and said Clint was only afraid of being challenged. His words landed hard, and the audience reacted with sharp gasps. Clint's patience snapped. He stepped closer to Robert, his hand gesturing firmly toward the side of the stage. His voice booming louder now, he told Robert to leave. Robert shook his head, refusing, saying no one had the right to silence him. The crowd erupted in whispers, some begging in their hearts for it to stop, others secretly thrilled by the drama. Security guards began to move closer to the stage, unsure if they should step in. Robert's voice was still ringing through the hall, Clint's voice cutting back with equal force. Their words overlapped, sharp and furious. But beneath it all was something deeper. Two men too proud, too legendary to give way. The moment hung heavy in the air. Clint glaring down at Robert, Robert refusing to bow. The clash was no longer just verbal. It was a test of dominance, a test of who would control the stage, the audience and the narrative, and in that moment, everyone realized that the situation had gone far beyond words. The line had been crossed. The stage was no longer a place of celebration. It had become a battlefield, and Clint Eastwood was ready to make his next move. Robert De Niro had refused to step back, and now the entire hall knew that something shocking, something unforgettable was about to happen. The crowd had never seen anything like it. Robert De Niro stood firm, his face set with defiance, while Clint Eastwood towered over him, calm but furious. The tension in the hall was so strong that even the air felt heavy. People were holding their breath, waiting for what would happen next. No one wanted to believe that two legends of cinema could lose control in front of the world. Yet the moment had arrived. Robert refused to leave the stage. His voice loud and sharp, he said he would not be silenced, that he had the right to speak his truth. The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and nervous applause. Some admired his courage. Others feared the clash would turn into something physical. Clint's eyes narrowed, his jaw tight. He raised his hand and gave a signal. The kind of gesture that needed no words. The kind of gesture that showed he was done talking. The security guards who had been waiting near the edge of the stage suddenly moved closer. Their steps heavy, their faces serious. The audience erupted into whispers. Cameras zoomed in, recording every second. Clint pointed directly at Robert. His voice steady and commanding, he said, "That's enough. Get him off my stage." The room shook with shock. Those words carried the weight of finality, and everyone knew this was not a request, it was an order. Robert's eyes widened. His face filled with disbelief, he stepped back slightly. Shaking his head, he laughed in anger, saying Clint had no right to throw him out, that this was not just his stage, that they were equals, but Clint didn't flinch. His tall frame and cold stare left no room for negotiation. The guards hesitated for only a moment, but Clint's sharp nod pushed them forward. The audience gasped as two guards stepped onto the stage, their hands cautious but ready. Robert waved them off, lifting his arms in protest, shouting that he was not going anywhere. His voice echoed in the hall. Half drowned by the buzzing whispers of the shocked crowd, Clint stood still, his face unreadable, his silence more powerful than Robert's shouting. The guards reached Robert. One touched his arm gently, asking him to step down. Robert pulled his arm back, his eyes blazing. He turned toward Clint and pointed his finger at him. His voice shaking with rage, he said Clint was afraid. Afraid of hearing the truth, the crowd erupted, some shouting for Robert, others for Clint. The hall had turned into a storm of divided voices. Clint finally moved, his hand slamming down on the table in front of him. The sound echoed like thunder. He leaned forward, his voice sharp as steel. He said, "Robert, you've crossed the line. This stage is no place for your arrogance." The words struck deep, and Robert froze for a moment, breathing hard, his chest rising and falling as he glared back at Clint. The guards stepped in closer, their hands firm now. Robert resisted, pulling back. The struggle made the crowd even more restless. Cameras flashed nonstop, capturing the historic clash. Some people in the audience stood up, unable to sit through the chaos. The host stood helplessly to the side, his attempts to calm the situation completely lost in the storm of voices. Finally, Clint raised his hand again, his voice booming across the hall. Louder than Robert, louder than the crowd. He said, "Escort him out now." His authority filled the room. The guards tightened their hold. Robert shouted in anger, his words lost in the noise, his face red with fury, his body resisting every step. But the guards pushed him gently but firmly toward the edge of the stage. The sight was unbelievable. Robert De Niro, one of the greatest actors alive, being forced off stage in front of the world. The audience sat frozen, their hearts pounding. Some couldn't believe Clint had gone this far. Others thought Robert had asked for it either way. No one could look away. The clash had reached its peak. Robert struggled to keep speaking, his voice echoing through the hall even as he was moved closer to the exit. He shouted about respect, about freedom, about how no one could silence him. But the sound of his voice was drowned by the gasps and murmurs of the audience. Clint stayed standing, his face calm again, his eyes cold, his presence unshaken. He had won the battle for the stage. As Robert was finally escorted into the wings, the hall fell into a heavy silence. No one clapped, no one cheered, they were too stunned. They had come to see two legends share stories, but instead they had witnessed a scene that would go down in history. Clint slowly sat back down, adjusting his jacket, his face showing no regret, only firmness. He leaned back in his chair as if nothing had happened, while the echoes of the shocking moment still filled the air. For the audience, it was unforgettable. For the cameras, it was gold, and for Hollywood, it was a scandal that would never be forgotten. Two giants had clashed, and Clint Eastwood had made the final move. He had kicked Robert De Niro off stage, and the world had watched every second. The silence inside the hall did not last long. Within minutes, the incident had escaped the four walls of the theater and exploded across the world. Phones had been recording, cameras had been flashing, and now clips of Clint Eastwood ordering Robert De Niro off stage were racing across the internet. By the time the audience walked out into the night, the story had already reached millions of people. Headlines appeared almost instantly. Some newspapers and websites praised Clint for standing his ground, calling him a man of discipline and respect who would not allow chaos on his stage. Others defended Robert, saying he was silenced for speaking his truth. The clash was no longer just between two men. It had become a global debate. On social media, fans chose sides. One group shared Clint's sharp words, saying that his calm authority proved why he was still a legend. They said Robert had gone too far, that he had been arrogant and disrespectful. Another group argued the opposite, saying Clint was stuck in the past, that he was too rigid, that Robert had every right to challenge him. Hashtags with both their names trended worldwide, turning the clash into a cultural event. Television networks replayed the footage again and again. Talk shows invited actors and critics to weigh in. Some older stars nodded in agreement with Clint, saying that discipline had always been the backbone of great cinema. Younger actors leaned toward Robert's side, saying that method acting had pushed the industry into deeper storytelling. Every comment only fueled the fire, making the clash bigger with every passing hour. Clint himself remained silent in the days that followed. Reporters camped outside his home, waiting for a statement, but he gave none. His silence was powerful. It made him appear unshaken, as though he did not need to explain himself. Robert, on the other hand, released a short comment through his team. He spoke of respect, of freedom, of how every actor had the right to express their art in their own way. But his words sounded careful, measured, not filled with the same fire he had shown on stage. The entertainment industry buzzed with gossip. Producers and directors whispered about what the incident meant. Some worried that the clash would damage future collaborations. Others believed it would only increase the value of both men. After all, controversy made headlines, and headlines kept names alive still. The bitterness of the fight could not be ignored. People wondered if the relationship between Clint and Robert had been permanently broken. For fans, the event became a story to tell. People shared where they were when they first saw the clip, how they reacted, what they thought. Memes appeared, jokes spread, and serious articles were written in the same breath. Some compared it to battles of old Hollywood, when stars had fought for the spotlight. Others said this clash was different, raw, more personal, because it showed the pride of two men who had defined cinema for decades. The hall where it happened became almost like a landmark. People who had been there told their stories in interviews, describing the tension, the silence, the moment Clint stood up, the way Robert resisted. Every detail became part of the myth. Some said they had felt fear. Others said they had felt excitement. But all agreed that they had witnessed history. The media frenzy grew larger when commentators began connecting the clash to the bigger story of Hollywood itself. They said Clint represented the old world of cinema, where toughness, simplicity, and control ruled, while Robert represented the new world, where immersion, transformation, and emotional depth defined greatness. Their fight on stage, some argued, was not just about two men but about two generations, two philosophies colliding in front of the world. Clint's supporters painted him as a hero who had defended dignity. Robert's fans painted him as a victim who had been humiliated. Both sides shouted louder and louder, until the clash became more than a single night. It became a symbol, a battle line that divided people everywhere. Through it all, the image of that night stayed fresh. Clint standing tall, his hand pointing toward the edge of the stage. Robert shouting, his body resisting. Guards trying to hold him. The crowd gasping, cameras flashing. It was replayed so many times that it began to feel like a scene from a movie. Except it was real. Late-night comedians joked about it. But even their jokes carried an edge. Everyone knew that something deeper had happened. Something that touched pride, identity, and legacy. This was not just a fight. It was a wound. And like all wounds, it would take time to heal. As days turned into weeks, the world kept talking. The clash had burned itself into memory. For Clint and Robert, the fallout was heavy. But for the audience who had witnessed it, and for the millions who watched online, it was unforgettable. Two giants had gone head-to-head, and the whole world had chosen to watch. In the days after the clash, the world waited for Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro to speak. The images of that night had already spread everywhere, but what people wanted most were the words of the two men themselves. Clint, as always, chose silence. He was seen going about his life, calm, collected, refusing to give interviews. When reporters called out to him, he gave only a faint smile and walked past. His silence became its own statement, a sign that he did not regret what he had done. Robert, on the other hand, could not remain quiet. His pride had been struck in front of millions, and he released a short statement. His words were polite but sharp. He spoke about respect, about artistic freedom, about how no actor should ever be told how to express himself. He did not name Clint directly, but everyone knew who the message was for. The statement was shared across every news channel, sparking another wave of debate. Fans divided even more. Some said Clint's silence showed strength, that he stood above the noise. Others argued that Robert's statement showed courage, that he stood up for his craft. The clash that began on stage had now turned into a battle of words, or in Clint's case, the lack of them. The world hung on every gesture, every sentence, every choice the two men made in Hollywood. The incident became the talk of the industry. Directors and producers whispered about it in private meetings. Some worried that working with Clint or Robert would now come with too much attention. Others thought the opposite, that their names were hotter than ever. Everyone agreed on one thing, though. The night had changed how people looked at both men. They were no longer just legends of cinema. They were symbols of two different worlds. Clint represented tradition, the old way, the discipline of a man who believed in instinct and control. Robert represented transformation, the modern approach, the deep dive into characters until an actor lost himself completely. Their fight had drawn a line between two philosophies, and the industry itself seemed to reflect that division. Older actors praised Clint. Younger ones defended Robert. It was no longer just about two men. It was about what acting meant to the world for the audience. The incident lived on like a story passed from one generation to another. People remembered where they were when they first saw the clip, how they felt, what side they chose. Some saw it as tragic, others as thrilling, but no one could forget it. It had burned itself into memory just like a great film. It had emotion, drama, tension, and a shocking ending. Robert appeared on a few talk shows weeks later. His tone softer now, but still firm. He said he had no personal hate for Clint, but he would never apologize for defending his craft. He said every actor had to follow his own path, and no one, not even a legend, had the right to question it. The audience clapped for him. Some even stood to cheer, but deep inside, people knew the scar from that night still lingered. Clint gave no interviews, but when asked about it at another event, he gave a short reply. He said, "I don't waste time on the past. I said what I meant, that was all. No long explanation, no apology. Just the same firm tone that had defined him for decades." The crowd erupted with applause, admiring his toughness, his refusal to bend, and so the clash remained unresolved. Two men walking their separate paths, each carrying his pride, each unwilling to bow. The world had hoped for reconciliation, maybe even a handshake, but none came instead. What remained was the memory of a night when the mask of Hollywood glamour fell away, revealing the raw human pride beneath. Years later, people still talked about it. Film students debated whose side they were on. Journalists wrote articles about how it reflected the change in cinema. Fans argued online as if the clash had happened yesterday. It became more than an incident. It became a legend, a story told again and again, proof that even the greatest could fall into conflict. For Clint Eastwood, the clash did not damage his legacy. It only added another chapter, another story that showed his strength. His refusal to compromise. For Robert De Niro, it did not weaken him either. It showed his fire, his passion, his refusal to be silenced. Both men carried the scars, but both also carried the respect of millions. In the end, the night was not just about anger. It was about truth. It showed that even legends are human, that pride and passion can burn as brightly in real life as they do on screen. The clash between Clint Eastwood and Robert De Niro became one of the most unforgettable moments in Hollywood history. A night when two giants stood face to face, and the world watched as respect, pride, and ego collided under the bright lights.